This is the videotape deposition of Joseph Nicolosi. This deposition is being held via video Zoom on 10/12/2021 at the time indicated on the video screen, which is 10:03 a.m. Would counsel please introduce themselves?
Patrick McGoey on behalf of Ramelli Janitorial Services, the plaintiff.
Michael Thomas on behalf of Ramelli as well.
Gaynell Williams on behalf of Mr. Nicolosi and Kelly Tebow on behalf of Mr. Nicolosi.
Matthew Sherman and Walter Woodruff on behalf of the City of Kenner.
Liz Lambert on behalf of the City of Kenner.
Will the court reporter please swear in the witness?
Okay, Mr. Nicolosi, I'm going to ask you to please raise your right hand. I will swear you in for testimony. There you go. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give in this deposition shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Mr. Nicolosi, again, my name is Patrick McGoey. We haven't had the pleasure of meeting. I represent Ramelli Janitorial Services. Before I start on your deposition, have you given a deposition before?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so you understand that the court reporter is going to take down my questions and your answers. But given that we're doing this via Zoom to accommodate your counsel, there could be a lag. So if you let me finish my question before you answer, and I will try to do the same. That way the court reporter can take down everything and we won't talk over each other. Is that fair enough?
Yes, sir.
Great. And if you answer a question, I will assume that you understood the question. Is it fair enough?
Yes, sir.
All right. Just for the record, can you tell the court reporter again your address?
My address is 95 McKinley Street, Kenner, Louisiana, 70065.
Okay. And what's your educational background?
I have high school and I've done educational requirements with police department and
We're losing his audio. He's frozen.
Mr. Nicolosi, sorry, you froze on us. Where did you go to high school?
East Jefferson.
Okay. And when did you graduate?
68.
All right. And did you graduate from college?
No.
Okay. And after you graduated in high school in 68, can you just briefly tell me your work history, what you did for a living?
Oh, when I got out of school and doing school, I was an auto mechanic for many years. I had a trucking company for a few years. Then I joined the police department in Kenner in 1974. Stayed there about 12 years or so, and then went into government.
Was that 74 for the police department, or was that 1984?
74.
Okay. And presently, what do you do for a living?
I'm retired from the government, and I do some small consulting jobs on the side.
Okay. What small consulting jobs are you doing right now?
Objection, privilege.
What I'm asking him who he works for.
That's correct. And we are asserting his Fifth Amendment privilege to remain silent.
Okay, so if the witness is going to assert his Fifth Amendment right, I'd ask the witness to assert that, not you, Gaynell.
I understand that.
Okay.
I'm making my objection. My objection is privilege and is based upon the Fifth Amendment.
Okay. So it's my understanding, Mr. Nicolosi, that you presently do some consulting work. Is that correct?
Objection,
Yep.
privilege.
He answered the question already, Gaynell. I'm just reasserting it so we can get the record clear on the privilege that he's going to be asserting.
If
Mr.
you asked the question previously and he answered it, then the objection is asked and answered.
Mr. Nicolosi, who are you presently doing consulting services for?
Objection, privilege.
Mr. Nicolosi, you're going to have to assert your Fifth Amendment privilege to every question that you're going to assert it with. Your lawyer cannot do that. So,
Okay,
Janelle,
based on the advice of my counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
okay. Are you presently a member of the New Orleans Aviation Board?
Objection. Relevance.
You can answer the question, Mr. Nicolosi.
You broke up. I didn't hear the question.
Mr. Nicolosi, are you presently a member of the New Orleans Aviation Board?
Kelly Tebow, we bring technical problems. Your questions, or we're not getting the complete question on our end. I'm not sure what it's. Maybe you can repeat it.
Sure. Are you all hardwired into the internet? Or are you all on a Wi-Fi?
We are on a Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Now, let me turn off my phone. Maybe that's causing interference.
Is anybody else having trouble hearing me talk, or is it just the witness?
You're crystal clear.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good, Patrick. You're good on our end.
Here too.
And you're coming in fine now. It was when you were asking your question that it was freezing up. So maybe
You're breaking up.
Try again and see what happens.
You all just froze for me. Did they freeze for everybody else as well?
Yes, and the audio's breaking up. It's that computer or the service y'all have on that computer that Mr. Nicolosi's on.
Okay, Nell, are you and Mr. Nicolosi in the same room? Y'all are in the same room, huh?
We're in a different room now. I'm not having difficulties. We may need to switch places because I'm not having any problems.
Yeah.
No.
For you.
Could y'all switch to places and let him use the computer you're on because you're clear?
I think we'll switch seats.
Okay.
I'll go on his computer because I'm not having frozen issue.
We'll be off the record for this, right, Marlene? And
No, we are on the record until someone says we are off and you say the video has stopped.
okay.
I'm fine with going off the record so we can get this straight on their end.
Okay.
We're off the record 10:12 a.m. We're back on the record. It is 10:18 a.m.
All right, Mr. Nicolosi, we're back. We had some audio issues, but hopefully we got them resolved. When we took the break, I was asking you about the present consulting services that you are providing. Just so the record's clear, who do you presently provide consulting services to?
Again, my objection is privilege, and he will assert his privilege.
Based on the advice of my counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Okay. Now, you said you started working for the city of Kenner in 1974 for the police department. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Can you briefly tell me what other positions you held at the city of Kenner from police department forward?
Community service director, budget analysis for the public works department, Code Enforcement Director, Public Works Director, Chief Administrative Officer.
And you were the CAO of Kenner in what year? 1998 you stepped down?
It's hard to remember. Probably before that. I don't recall when I took office as a CAO.
And it's my understanding that after you left the city of Kenner, you went to work for Jefferson Parish.
Yes, sir.
And what did you do for Jefferson Parish?
I was administrative assistant for Councilman Louis Congemi at the time for Council District 4.
And when did you retire from Jefferson Parish?
13 years ago, 12 years ago. I guess it was about 2 years or so after, probably in 06, 07. It was after Katrina.
Okay. And when you retired from working for Jefferson Parish, did you start a consulting business?
Yes.
And what was the name of the consulting business?
NBN Services, LLC.
And is NBN Services LLC still the entity that you provide consulting services through today?
Yes, sir.
So do you provide any consulting services personally, or is NBN Services the company that you use to provide all your consulting services to your various clients?
Objection privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Okay. Just, I'll try to break that question apart because it had a couple parts so I can see what it is that you have issue with. Do you personally provide services that you are paid personally to any companies at the present time?
Objection privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
Do you provide consulting services to Sydney Torres?
Objection privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, do you provide consulting services to IV Waste?
Objection.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, have you ever provided consulting services to IV Waste?
Objection privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, have you ever provided consulting services to Sydney Torres?
Objection privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, what is your relationship with Mayor Ben Zahn?
Objection privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, are you Ben Zahn's friend?
Objection privilege.
Object to the form of the question too, Patrick.
Subject to that, you can answer, Mr. Nicolosi.
Objection privilege. He cannot answer.
Based
If his
on
amendment rights implicated.
based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer. I lost the screen.
Do you have the screen back?
There we go.
Great. Mr. Nicolosi, I noticed on the Secretary of State's website that the registered agent for NBN Services LLC is J. William Becknell II. Who is that?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Can you tell me what Mr. Beckman does for NBN services?
Objection, privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Does NBN Services have any employees other than you, Mr. Nicolosi?
Objection, privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
What type of consulting services does NBN Services LLC offer?
Objection, privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
There we go.
Okay.
Mr. Nicolosi, did NBN Services provide any consulting services to Ramelli Janitorial?
Objection. Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on my advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Since you've retired from Jefferson Parish, have you performed any work directly for the city of Kenner?
Objection. Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Has Sidney Torres paid you or NBN Services any funds for anything?
Objection. Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Has Ivy Waste paid you, Mr. Nicolosi, anything to get the garbage contract in the city of Kenner?
Objection. Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Can you tell me, Mr. Nicolosi, what you did to prepare for today's deposition?
Not a lot. I mean, just talk to my counsel, and here I sit today answering your question.
Okay, so when you said you spoke to your counsel, who did you speak to in preparation for today's deposition?
Ms. Williams.
Did you speak to any of your other lawyers to prepare for today's deposition?
Objection.
Based on advice.
Privilege.
I'm not asking for you to disclose any attorney-client communication. I'm simply asking, did you talk to any other lawyer in preparation for your deposition today other than Ms. Gaynell Williams?
No.
Okay. Now, did you speak to Matt Sherman and Woody Woodruff are on the call? They represent the city of Kenner. And they're with the firm of Shahardy Sherman. Did you speak to anyone with the firm of Shahardy and Sherman in preparation for your deposition today?
No.
Does the firm Shahardy Sherman or any of its lawyers represent you in any matters?
Not presently.
So has Shahardy Sherman ever represented you as their lawyer before?
Yes.
In what matter?
I think that's privilege. I had a civil issue that I was represented with, but nothing relating to this.
And who at Shahardy Sherman represented you?
David Sherman.
And when did David Sherman's representation of you end?
Check to the form of the question. Patrick, I don't know much about the representation. I don't know if it's still ongoing or when. I don't know if Mr. Nicolosi knows that either, but object to the form of the question. I think it's a broad question.
That's fine. I think the witness testified that it was a matter that was resolved or over, but is Shahardy Sherman and Dave Sherman still your lawyer today?
Regarding an unrelated matter,
Well, tell me this. Does Shahardy Sherman represent you today?
and I'm going to object to the form of the question. I don't want you to try to twist it to make it sound like we're representing him for anything in this case. You're asking for a completely unrelated matter in which your client himself.
Look, Matt, you can make an objection, but we're not going to have speaking objections on the record. I'm trying to get this witness to answer a question as to whether your firm is still representing him. That's not privileged. I'm not asking.
What do you? It's broad. No, I'm not asserting privilege. In what matter? You're talking about the unrelated matter?
I don't know if it's unrelated. I'm going to find that out. But
well, ask him.
Okay. What did Shahardy Sherman represent you for, Mr. Nicolosi?
Objection.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Okay. So it's your testimony that Shahardy Sherman represented you in a different matter, but you're taking the Fifth Amendment on the question of asking you what they represented you on.
Yes.
Okay. So it's an unrelated matter that also implicates your Fifth Amendment right to self-incrimination.
The witness has answered the question.
Do you have any joint defense agreement with the city of Kenner in this litigation?
No.
Did you meet or discuss for today's deposition with anyone that works for the city of Kenner?
No.
Now, I'm going to show you a document that is marked Nicolosi number 2, and we'll put it up on the screen for you to see it and everybody else to see it. And this, Mr. Nicolosi, is a return of a subpoena ducis tecum that we had issued to you in another case. Do you recall receiving a subpoena from my office to produce documents?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Okay, so if you look on page 6 of this document, Andy, your counsel who's representing you today is Gaynell Williams, correct?
Yes.
And so she sent my office these responses on your behalf. Are you claiming a Fifth Amendment privilege on the responses that you gave to a subpoena a year ago?
Objection, privilege.
Well, let's ask this. Did Ms. Williams have the authority to respond to the subpoena on your behalf?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Okay. Did you produce a series of photographs to my office in response to this subpoena?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Okay. Would you go to photo number 4 of 15, a Nicolosi number 2? Mr. Nicolosi, did you take this picture, which is labeled 4 of 15 and attached to the response to the subpoena that was issued to you?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, how did you come across this photograph of IV waste garbage cans?
Objection, privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, this is photograph 4 of 15. Did you take this photograph yourself?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Are you going to assert your Fifth Amendment right to every question I ask concerning the response to the subpoena that your lawyer sent me back in 2020?
We on behalf of Mr. Nicolosi, we will only object if the question is one wherein he can claim the privilege. We are not making a blanket refusal to answer questions.
Can you pull up photograph 9 of 15? So this is photograph 9 of 15 attached to the response to the subpoena that your counsel sent me in 2020. What is this a photograph of?
Objection, privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, looking at photograph 9 of 15, who is the person speaking into the microphone in front of the IV waste truck?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, when the photograph in Exhibit 9 of 15 was taken, were you getting paid by IV Waste to provide consulting services for their municipal garbage contract with the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, will you tell me what your role was in connection with providing IV waste garbage cans to the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, is your email address nicolosi626@gmail.com?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, can you tell me whether you've searched your emails before you responded to this subpoena to look for emails that were responsive to it?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, did you search for any text messages on your phone to provide in response to this subpoena?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Have you ever done work for IV Waste?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
When you worked for Mr. Ramelli, did you receive emails?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
When you worked for Mr. Romelli, did you ever text him or his employees?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Did you search for text messages to provide in response to the subpoena?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Have you ever texted Sidney Torres?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Do you know Julie Tafaro?
Yes.
Who is Julie Tafaro?
She is an employee manager,
A manager of what?
IV Waste.
Okay. How did you come to know Ms. Tafaro?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Have you ever texted Ms. Tafaro?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Andy, will you pull up Nicolosi number 7? Mr. Nicolosi, this is an August 28, 2020 letter from a lawyer, Monica Derbies Gibson with Berrigan Litchfield, to me. And attached to this letter are certain text messages that I want to ask you some questions about. Andy, would you go to page Bait stamp 205, the third page of the document? Can you see that, Mr. Nicolosi?
Yes, I do.
Do you recognize that text train?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, do you have a friend that lives at 1901 Couture Street in Shell Beach?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Did you send this text to Julie Tafaro?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Andy, let's go to the next page, exhibit 20, bait stamp 206. Can you see these text messages, Mr. Nicolosi?
Let's see it.
Were you, what is your understanding of the Jefferson Parish Council meeting in June of 2020?
Objection.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Do you recognize these text messages as being text messages between you and Mr. Torres?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Andy, turn to page 207. This is another text train with the same number. Starts off, hey, just touching base. All is good. We'll have coffee next week if possible. I had to get all my yearly physical done yesterday. Have a good weekend. Hope the crap with Metro doesn't spill over. Is that a text message that you sent Sydney Torres in June of 2020?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Have you ever had coffee with Sydney Torres?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
What involvement, if any, Andy, you can take down that exhibit. Mr. Nicolosi, what involvement, if any, did you have in Ramelli Janitorial Services attempts to get an amendment to its garbage contract with the city of Kenner at the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Did Mr. Ramelli fire you for working from him, or did you quit?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Did you ever lobby the city of Kenner City Council on behalf of Ramelli to get increases in the prices for recycling under Ramelli Janitorial's contract with the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Did you ever pay for coffee or lunches for city council members to lobby them on behalf of any of your clients?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
When did you stop working for Ramelli Janitorial Services?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Do you recall attending a meeting with the city of Kenner and IV Waste to discuss IV Waste getting the contract from the city of Kenner for the municipal solid waste collection?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Do you ever recall discussing that meeting with a reporter from WWL?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
Andy, can you pull up Exhibit 12? This is a June 3rd, 2020 WWL report, and the title is Employees Say Kenner Trash Collector Mixed Recyclables with Garbage and Dumped It in Landfill. And the author is David Hammer. Did you ever speak to David Hammer concerning this article that WWL published?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Did you ever discuss with Mayor Zahn meeting and talking to David Hammer concerning this article that's identified Nicolosi 12?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Andy, if you could go to the second to last page of Nicolosi 12. If you could blow this up, I want at least all the text. I don't need the bottom part. So take some time, Mr. Nicolosi, read this part of Mr. Hammer's article, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about it. Have you had a chance to finish reading that, Mr. Nicolosi?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Up at the top in that second paragraph, it says, Romelli has also alleged, open quote, backroom dealing, close quote, by Kenner, because Joseph Nicky Nicolosi, a longtime consultant for Romelli, who helped the firm get its original contract in 2007, is close friends with Zahn. Do you recall Mr. Romelli alleging a backroom dealing of how IV Waste got this contract with the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Were you involved in any backroom dealing to get the city of Kenner contract for IV Waste?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
This article goes on to say in the next paragraph, Nicolosi said he was representing Romelli as a liaison to the city when he attended meetings between Torres and Kenner officials, including Zahn, in January. Did you attend any meetings in January of 2020 with Mayor Zahn and Mr. Torres while you were still representing Romelli?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the counsel advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Mayor Zahn is quoted as saying, I asked Nick to join us to give the input so he knew that I was not happy with Romelli. And he made it very clear when IV Waste walked in I work for Bob Romelli. Full disclosure, I'm here to hear the garbage proposal. Did you say that in a meeting in January 2020 with Mayor Zahn and Sidney Torres?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
2 paragraphs down, you are quoted, Mr. Nicolosi, by David Hammer, saying, open quote, I told Bob it was on a slippery slope, close quote, Nicolosi said. He said, Nicky, if you don't like it, just quit. Did you tell that to David Hammer for this article?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Go down 2 more. The next paragraph says Torres denied that Nicolosi ever worked on his behalf to force Romelli out. Did you work on Torres's behalf to force Mr. Romelli out of the contract in the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
The next paragraph, Mr. Torres is quoted as saying, I have not hired Nick Nicolosi. I'm not looking to hire Nick Nicolosi, and I've never paid Nick Nicolosi anything out of any of my companies, comma, personally or anything, period. In that statement, false, Mr. Nicolosi?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
You go on to say to the reporter, I wouldn't mind working for Sidney someday. As you sit here today in October of 2021, have you ever worked for Sidney Torres?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
And based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Nicky, will you pull up Exhibit Nicolosi 14? This is a January 23, 2020 email from Nicolosi626@gmail.com. Is that your email address?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
On Monday, Thursday, January 23rd, 2020, were you invited to attend a meeting on Monday, January 27, 2020 in the mayor's conference room with Ed Rapier, Lee Roussel, and Deborah Foshi and the mayor?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
On January 23rd, 2020, did you work for Mr. Romelli?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
The subject line for this meeting is titled IV Waste. What did you understand this meeting in the mayor's conference room to be about?
Objection, privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer any questions.
Mr. Nicolosi, did you attend this meeting at the mayor's conference room in City of Kenner on Monday, January 27, 2020 to discuss IV waste?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Andy, can you pull up exhibit Nicolosi 15? This is a February 6, 2020 email from Ed Rapier. Do you know Mr. Rapier?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Who did Mr. Rapier work for?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Okay, so this is an email from Ed Rapier with a kennerla.us email address. And I'll represent to you, Mr. Nicolosi, that is the email account for anyone that works for the city of Kenner. And when I scan across all the recipients of this email and all the people that are copied on it, everyone is associated with the city of Kenner except ebectorreslaw.com and Nick Nicolosi, Nicolosi626@gmail.com. Now, I understand that Mr. Torres is Sidney Torres's lawyer. But my question to you, sir, is why was the city of Kenner's city attorney sending you a draft of a solid waste collection contract between the city of Kenner and IV Waste?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege also calls for speculation.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution. Decline the answer.
Did you receive this email, which is identified as Nicolosi 15, on February 6, 2020, from Ed Rapier, containing a proposed contract with IV Waste?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Did you discuss this proposed contract with IV Waste with Mayor Zahn?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Have you ever seen IV Waste contract with the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Have you ever met with Sidney Torres, John Litchfield, and Julie Tafaro to discuss the IV Waste contract?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline the answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, do you provide consulting services to digital engineering?
Objection, privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline the answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, do you provide consulting services to Solulence?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline the answer.
I might be mispronouncing the name. Maybe it's Solutions or Solulence. Have you ever heard of a company with a name of Solutions or Solulence?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
If you've ever heard of the name of a company? That's the question, Gay. Now, are you certain of privilege on that?
You were restating a name that you mentioned in your previous question when you asked him if he had ever done any consulting work with them.
Correct. And I
So
had
I
changed.
am,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
maintaining it.
Gotcha. So
I'm maintaining my objection.
just so the question's clear, have you ever heard of a company called Solutions or Solulix?
Objection, privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline the answer.
And the company that I'm referring to, Solulence, has on their website that they have new disaster recovery contract with Jefferson Parish. Do you know that company?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Do you know Dr. Sternhill with the company Solulence? Solutient is the name of the spelling of the company's name.
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
When did you learn that Ramelli Janitorial Services was going to be losing its contract with the city of Kenner?
Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, do you have a Facebook account?
Objection. Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, have you ever posted anything to your Facebook account concerning IV waste?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Andy, will you pull up Exhibit 20, Nicolosi 20? That's not the one. Maybe 19 or 20, 21. No, not. I apologize. It's the other one. 18. Looking at Exhibit 18 is a Facebook posting. I'll represent to you that it was posted on March 4, 2020, but it does not have a date on it. Do you recognize that to be your Facebook account?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Did you post to your Facebook account a picture of an IV waste truck with the heading, "Coming to a neighborhood near you soon"?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, did you take the photograph of the IV waste trucks that are depicted on your Facebook page?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Do you recall deleting this entry from your Facebook account after it was posted in March of 2020?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on the advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Now, Andy, can you pull up Exhibit 20? Mr. Nicolosi, this is a series of posts from April of 2020 on your Facebook page. Do you know when Ivy Waste took over the collection of garbage in the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
First post on this Facebook page from you says, Kenner residents, I see Ivy Waste garbage cans being put out for pickup. They won't be emptied by Ramelli. If you have IV, don't use them until Friday. Where did you come to find out that Ramelli wasn't going to be emptying cans, IV waste cans that were put in the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
All right, on the fourth column of this thread, there's a post from Carol Fahey Luna. Do you know Carol?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
Miss Luna posted, got my recycle can, but still waiting on my regular can. I'm sure it will be here in a day, it too. My next pickup isn't until Saturday. I really like the recycle can. Thanks. And your response was, Carol Fahey Luna, use what you have till the new one gets there. It may take till next week or so. Did you post that response to your Facebook page?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
On April 29, 2020, how did you come about knowing when IV Waste would get its garbage cans out to all the residents of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
Did you have discussions with IV Waste and the city of Kenner prior to April 29, 2020 concerning IV Waste using Ramelli's garbage cans when it took over the city of Kenner garbage contract on May 1, 2020?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
All right, go into the last column on this email, this Facebook posting. Marjorie Munez Bateman. Do you know Miss Bateman?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
Ms. Bateman says, will Ramelli pick up their cans? How do we get IV can? ? And your response is, Marjorie Munez, all residents will receive a new IV can. How did you know that all residents in the city of Kenner were going to get a new IV waste can?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution. Decline to answer.
Says it might take several more days to get all delivered. How did you know it was going to take several more days to get all the IV waste cans delivered to the city of Kenner residents?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution. Decline to answer.
You go on to say, keep using whatever cans you got till you receive new one. Then the city will inform everyone when the old ones will be picked up. Hope you've been doing well. Stay safe, my friend. Who at the city of Kenner told you that all the residents were to use Romelli's cans until they got picked up and got an IV waste can?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution. Decline to answer.
Is Marjorie Muniz a friend of yours?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Pull up Andy Exhibit Howard 2. Looking at the photograph of Howard 2, which is depicting a bunch of different colored trash cans, can you tell me what colored trash cans Romelli Janitorial Services provided to the city of Kenner when you worked for Romelli?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
So as you sit here today, you can't tell me what color garbage cans Romelli supplied to the city of Kenner residents?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Okay, can you pull up Sylvester number 5, Andy? It's also labeled Nicolosi 22. Is that a picture of you in this photograph, Nicolosi 22?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
When this photograph was or video was taken of you and Sidney Torres, were you working for Sidney Torres and IV Waste?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Well, what were you doing that day with Mr. Torres that's depicted in Nicolosi 22?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
You've been asserting your Fifth Amendment rights quite often today to questions. Are you aware of any criminal investigations into you?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Andy, can you pull up Exhibit 27? Mr. Nicolosi, attached as Exhibit 27 are copies of 22,000 litter citations issued to Robert Ramelli on May 12, 2020? Do you know what department issues litter citations for the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Mr. Nicolosi, when you were the head of code enforcement for the city of Kenner, that is a position you held, correct?
Yes.
Objection.
When you were the head of code enforcement for the city of Kenner, were you responsible or had oversight over the issuing of litter citations?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. And why don't you look in the camera and tell us your involvement with the issuance of these 22,000 litter citations to Mr. Ramelli in May of 2020?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution, decline the answer.
Were you involved in the issuance of these litter citations to Mr. Ramelli?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Have you ever been to Ivy Waste facility?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Beginning in January of 2020, were you paid to be an agent for Ivy Waste?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Beginning in January of 2020, did you act on behalf of Ivy Waste to assist Ivy Waste in getting and performing its contract with the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Did you collude with Sidney Torres to get the Kenner garbage contract from Ramelli Janitorial Services to Ivy Waste?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Did Sidney Torres pay Mayor Zahn to get the city of Kenner contract?
Objection calls for speculation, as well as privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Well, tell me what involvement you had in Sidney Torres paying Mayor Zahn to get the garbage contract for the city of Kenner.
Objection assumes facts not in evidence, misstates the facts. Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Did you give Mayor Zahn any money on behalf of Sidney Torres for Mr. Torres to get the garbage contract in the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Did you collude with Sidney Torres to use Ramelli's garbage cans in May of 2020 to pick up garbage in the city of Kenner?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence. Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline the answer.
Well, Gaino, it's interesting you say assumes facts not in evidence, but we can pull up, go back to Facebook, the second Facebook post, Andy. That's, I believe, exhibit 21 maybe, or 22.
My objection was twofold, and my client did invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination.
Right. And I'm trying to address your one that says assumes facts not in evidence. We looked at Nicolosi 20 and pull up that last column, Andy, if you could. Aren't you telling your friend Marjorie Muniz that keep using what cans you got until you receive a new one from IV Waste?
Objection, privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I cite my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
So do you remove your objection, Gaynell, that says to the effect of it assumes facts not in evidence when the document speaks for itself and your witness your client won't answer questions about the document, asserting his Fifth Amendment?
I do not remove my objection.
Fair enough. Well, why don't you provide me enlighten me, Mr. Nicolosi, on what involvement you had with IV Waste and their putting out cans in the city of Kenner.
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
Have you ever contacted Cascade Engineering on behalf of IV Waste to handle the acquisition and distribution of 22,000 IV Waste garbage cans to the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
Have you ever spoke with Bob Durden with Cascade Engineering?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
Have you had a conversation with anyone in the city of Kenner over the last 2 years that is not self-incriminating?
Objection, privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
Okay. Why don't you give me a break, Gaynell? Let me check my notes and we'll be pretty close to wrapping things up.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Going off the record, it's 11:27 a.m. We're back on the record. It's 11:37 a.m.
Mr. Nicolosi, I just have a few follow-up questions to make sure I got the record clear. Since you retired from working for Jefferson Parish, have you provided any services to the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer.
And more specifically, since January of 2020 to the present, which is October of 2021, have you provided any services to the city of Kenner?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer any questions.
Did you ever have any discussions with Mayor Zahn concerning his unhappiness with the job Ramelli Janitorial Services was doing for the city of Kenner under the garbage contract?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution and decline to answer.
Did Mayor Zahn tell you that he was terminating Ramelli's contract in 2020?
Objection, Fifth Amendment privilege.
Based on advice of counsel, I assert my Fifth Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, decline to answer questions.
That's all the questions I have for you, Mr. Nicolosi. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, sir.
I understand.
Thank you.
I think Matt doesn't have any questions for you. He just needs to say it.
No, we don't have any questions.
This concludes the deposition of Mr. Joseph Nicolosi. We're going off the record. It is 11:39 a.m.